personal values can really impact kind of your professional space. You can, much more than you know, be impacting the people around you. And that collectively, that is worth doing. And because there will be a shift, you may not ever see it or be able to calculate it, which would drive a green engineer crazy because there's no data to it.
This episode is about you not getting fired, or more specifically, not getting fired while still using every inch of influence within your company to achieve sustainability goals. Knowing that A, unfortunately, the vast majority of responsible technologists don't hold a C-level position. B, we're facing strong headwinds on climate-related topics. C, many parts of the world are not experiencing their shiniest and happiest moment ever, to say the least. Let's be honest, it's understandable to feel a bit discouraged and powerless at the moment. Still, we shouldn't, at least if we'll listen to the work of Andrea Learned. Andrea has a 30-year career in marketing and communication that follow a fascinating arc. She co-authored Don't Think Pink, What Makes Women Really Buy, and was a leading voice on gender-based marketing. That marketing expertise collided with a personal appetite for sustainability, leading her to write a master's thesis on corporate sustainable leadership and pivot entirely into the climate space. Andrea is obsessed with influence and leading the change. Her award-winning podcast, Living Change, A Quest for Climate Leadership, was all about it, as well as a new show, Name and Fame, which first episode just went out 2 weeks ago. For once, we didn't talk about tech in this episode, but about joy, being a quiet leader, influencing in the age of Gen AI, and even mental health for sustainability advocates. And I'm positive that these topics are what many responsible technologists need at the moment. So without further ado, here's my discussion with Andrea. Hello, Andrea. Welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to be here, Gaël.
And I'm glad as well. Despite the massive time difference that we have, we managed. And, before we deep dive into everything that you've researched and advocated, I have a sort of a side question. And it's related to your old car,
Alrighty.
the Subaru. Because almost 10 years ago, you said that you were super proud to have, I think it was a 21-year-old Subaru. And that was sort of you leading by example and showing that we don't need to change a car every 5 or not even every 10 years. And I was wondering, do you still have the Subaru?
It's such a great question because I would have still had it, but it got to a point where it was way more expensive to maintain it than seemed right. And at the same time, I was feeling like I really need to go electric. And so I think it was about 2021 when I was leasing an electric vehicle just to check it out. And then it turns out there's more to the story because by June of last year, I realized that I was not driving enough to keep having a car. And so I gave up my car. And so I now just have a bike and an e-bike for getting around Seattle. So that's the story. So the Subaru was amazing. Yeah. But I expect that at some point I'll probably get a car again and it will definitely be an EV. So I think that's the full progression of that story. But I felt very proud about that Subaru for sure.
And you should. And actually, that's a great transition with your faming approach, because this is actually exactly what I've just done, introducing you with this question and this first question for the podcast, because you advocate a name and fame approach, which is quite new, I would say. I really love it. I love the fact that you've chosen this wording for your new podcast. And yet, and I might be sometimes a bit the devil advocate during this episode, and I'm really sorry for this, but this name and fame approach is sort of the opposite of the climate doom and gloom narrative that we have most of the time. But in my field, which is tech sustainability, a lot of advocacy is built around alarming data, AI energy consumption, e-waste volume, rebound effects. How would you balance urgency with the positive framing you champion?
Well, I think our talking about this story was really part of it, which is I am connecting the dots between your human values and what you do in the workplace. And so I'm out here talking about the influence of people talking about their own values and kind of the way they live their life and how that integrates in their professional sphere. And so to be known for riding a bike is part of the brand that I want to deliver in terms of, I think that social norms can shift if you see that other people are doing this. And so with regard to green tech, it is that the work that you're doing can be depressing, that the data is all pointing to like scary situations and all of that. But I'm saying there's more of connecting the dots with your personal values, storytelling about that. And I don't mean in some fancy way, but making sure that your human values are part of what you're expressing in the work world, because you will be more trusted, your leadership will be more trusted if they get that not only are you heads down in your tech world, but you are also trying to live life a little bit more, low carb, kind of that idea in real life. So it's all about building trust. And I'll give you an example. If there are like 5 people that work in green tech and one of them is known to ride their bike for local transportation or to be vegan for climate purposes or whatever, they're going to be more trusted in a space because they're seen living those values throughout their life, not just in their keyboard, their professional space. And so I'm looking to name and fame people who are being more public about the fact that they do these things in their regular life. And that connects the dots, and then that will give them more influence. That's my theory.
Okay, and this influence request some sort of a knowledge, or at least prior knowledge regarding the situation, because I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Kotler, the burning platform. That the fact that there are these two sides of the same coin, which is the burning platform, the urgency of change, but also the promised land. When I've studied really partially, I'm sorry about it, your work, and listen to your podcast, what I found very interesting is that you focus way more on the promised land. And one of the very strong components of this promised land is actually showing people that it's feasible, because this name and fame approach is actually, hey, they're not there because no one has already achieved fully decarbonized life. It's well, they're paving the way toward the situation. And my question was a bit related that, do you think it's enough, or do we still need the burning platform, which is, hey, we've got a bit of an issue regarding climate change, resource exhaustion, water, blah, 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 blah. How do you balance the two? Do you think that we are over talking about the doom and gloom aspect of it? I'm very curious about your take on this.
Yeah, I definitely think we need both. And I know that this name and shame way of talking about it is effective, but especially my sense is that in this time when, well, especially sitting in the middle of the United States, we're in this major existential crises and everything is sort of falling apart. It's like there needs to be a thread. We need to be a sign that there's some positive that people are making changes and that there is like a little glimmer of a light through this. And I think that, to your point, not a lot of people do look at, well, yes, cities are having a hard time or whatever, but look at what this mayor of this kind of smaller city in the United States, look what they've done. Look at the change. If they can do it, then this other mayor can do it. So I'm looking at that shift in social norms of leadership. And that is, it doesn't need to be a statistically significant, like this is happening. It needs to be the perception of a social norm shifting, which is a much smaller thing. And I think if we get, let's just say, for example, we get 5 mayors who are making these change, and maybe they're also known to ride their bike for transportation, say, then we start to get everyone going, and people are telling stories about it, and the media's covering it to any degree. Then it's like, oh, interesting. It sure does seem like the country's mayors are tending in this direction. It's just the perception of the social norm we need to change. That's my idea. So yes to the doom and gloom, and then that's motivating, and that kind of, we need people working on that side of things. But I don't think enough people are in a way, I feel like I'm sort of looking out and going, oh, I see somebody, doing this in Austin, Texas. I'm in Seattle. I'm trying to unearth and sort of emerge these stories so that people continue to have some layer of hope. And then they realize the importance of telling their little story. So again, bikes and e-bikes are going to be my example. The way that people convert to e-bikes from like only driving their SUVs, and in the United States, it appears to me that everyone's got 2 or 3 SUVs. The way that people convert to that is by seeing the neighbor that they like, who they have barbecues with in the summer or whatever, suddenly riding by on an e-bike with their kid, taking him to school. It's the same thing. I would say I interviewed several mayors for the Living Change podcast. And really one of my key points was talking about what is the difference of being seen riding up to some sort of official city meeting with your bike helmet and your bike bag. That's part of the story. And these mayors are deliberate about it. And they say, yes, people are noticing, and that makes their changes in transportation policies much more trusted. So these they're just little flashes of, these are my values. No one's standing up on some rock and saying, look at me, I'm so great, I'm doing this. They're just kind of riding their kid up to school on a bike, and people are like, wow, that he seems happy every time he gets here, and he zooms up to the front of the line and zooms. So it's these little kind of small ways of demonstrating, and that's why my previous podcast was called Living Change. They are seen living the change. And we need more people to feel comfortable being seen living the change in some way, with the food they eat, with their transportation, etc. That gives even the doom and gloomers like, oh, I can be a doom and gloomer, but maybe I could also start talking about how I love riding an e-bike now compared to driving a car 5 years ago. We need more of that.
But that's really interesting, because let me unpack a bit here. I see several criteria for this to work. The first one is actually really focusing on what works and how people are leading the change. But usually with leading, it's such a big word that we tend to say leading equals leader. And what the emphasis is sort of the action on a daily basis, which is not like, okay, I'm flying over to COP whatever number to save the world and deliver the most amazing speech. No, I'm just biking to school with my kids. That's the way I do things. So this sort of a humble yet super efficient, because after all, one day after the other, this is quite a lot of carbon which is saved. Plus, it delivers a constant message rather than a one shiny a moment, and then we actually don't know what the so-called leader will do. What I also, and that may be the part number 2, is that it seems for you, and that's a question I would love you to answer, that it sort of immune you to the attack of what I called activism purity. Is that, oh, you ride an e-bike, but hey, you've still got an iPhone. Or you ride an e-bike, but last time I checked, you took your vacation flying all over the state or whatever. Am I correct that these two things, this sort of more humble approach, protects you also against this sort of attack?
Yes, you got it. You nailed it. So your two questions are great, because I get this a lot. I am not a leader, quote unquote. I'm not a CEO. What does it matter? Or what do I don't have any influence. And I call bullshit to that. BS, sorry. I call BS to that, because each of us, let's just even say we have 5 people that we influence in our professional sphere. People are like, I don't know what it is, but I like what that Gaël's up to, and I'm watching what he's doing in his real life. Like, we have 5 people in our sector that we influence. Maybe some of them don't give a rip about climate, but suddenly they're going, oh, wow, that e-bike looks really fun. You can influence climate change or climate action because it's fun, right? Or whatever. So that's one of those things is I mean, your two questions were, one, leadership, redefining leadership. You don't have to be a CEO to have a lot of influence. And also, alternatively, ultimately, I would love to inspire some CEO one day to say, you know what? I started riding my kids or whatever. I gave my kids in college e-bikes and it's changed whatever. I want people to be more public about these things that they've switched that are both joyful, because joy is a lot of my name and fame stuff, both joyful and have climate impacts. And that CEO, my example has long been like, what if some huge tech CEO who used to be known for sustainability, fewer and fewer now, but was up on stage at COP and said, just sort of casually mentioned that they were vegan. That is an aspirational person that people look up to, that's making a bajillions of dollars and having a huge impact in the world, et cetera, who said they were vegan. That makes it a couple notches more accessible to explore that lifestyle for a lot of people. I'm trying to make the idea of exploring going plant-based, riding an e-bike or riding a bike and driving less, flying less, right, potentially, et cetera. I'm trying to make that a little bit more like, oh, if they're doing it, I can do it, or I'm already doing it. I should be a little bit more public about it. So I want to inspire people. A lot of people probably already are doing some of these things. I want them to reflect it more. And again, your point about being quietly influencing. This isn't about neon signs. This is about pulling up to a meeting with your bike bag and your bike helmet. That's an indication, right? That's just quiet. That's what I do. People know that I bike everywhere, not because I run in saying how much I bike, but because I always just have a bike bag and a bike helmet with me. That's just how I roll,
Social proof.
Yes, I have social proof.
I got it. A quick word about the sponsor of this episode, Resilio. Resilio provides leading data, tools, and professional services to assess and reduce the environmental footprint of tech. As a Green IO listener, Resilio grants you a 1 month free trial access to their Resilio database, a search engine for the footprint of any IT equipment or services. Find the carbon or water footprint for tens of thousands of products in a click, and so much more. The link for this special offer is in the show notes. Full disclosure, I only accept partnership with companies whose services or initiatives I personally support or use myself. As usual, however, I'll let you be your own judge about these products. When I was studying your approach and a bit of the philosophy, I think the social proof, the social influence, the social pressure was, quoting you, an untapped tool. But, and this is my question, I was wondering, especially in the US at the moment, does it still work in a fragmented societies? And by that I mean, we might assume that it puts social pressure on someone if they've got 3 SUV, as you just mentioned. But how much of an impact your approach can still have beyond the communities which are already convinced? For instance, maybe faming as you do, someone for being a sustainably achiever can actually be shaming this person in many US communities today. It's like, oh, he's a vegan. I think there is a very negative word at the moment used by masculinists, which is soya boy. So does it still work in a fragmented society, your approach, or only to enhance what is already achievable in a sort of community of already convinced people?
I think I get what you're getting at. And I believe that it does work in a fragmented world because you are not jumping up and down saying I'm vegan. So to your point, you had asked earlier about, does this approach make me a little bit more immune to the purists and to the people, right? And so you are not jumping up and down saying I'm vegan or talking about driving less. You are reflecting it and you are impacting people. And it is something that will kind of, I've used the term squeak out, like over time, people will be like, oh, I've heard him mention that e-bike a couple times. Like you are so not forcefully doing this that you are not becoming a lightning rod for everybody to call you out on it or to troll you. And these little ways that you work in your own community, maybe just with your neighbors or whatever, matter because they help you kind of see, oh my gosh, I've influenced, I can't count the number of people that I've influenced to buy an e-bike. Yeah, I can't. At this point, it's crazy. And so I feel really proud of that. That makes me more likely to let slip in any situation that, oh my gosh, I love getting everywhere by bike. And so you are training yourself in a way. This isn't about, making some huge stand and putting it out in a press release and whatever. It's you slowly building kind of an awareness. In a way, I'm a therapist, right? You're slowly building an awareness that reflecting this is powerful. And if you can shift 5 neighbors, what if you also helped, a couple of the main tech people that you come across in conferences or whatever to consider riding a bike for transportation 1 day a week? It would be huge. And so it's all very quiet. It's all very kind of low key. And I guess I'm a very positive person in that. And here's the other thing. No one's doing any science or research on the thing that I'm talking about, right? There's no scientific, because it's so low key that no one's going to make any money on the stuff that I'm suggesting, right? I'm saying, dial it down, get rid of your car. Consider, I'm saying, dial it down. Well, here in the US, the thing that's so interesting to me is it's just meat prices and dairy prices are, just going crazy. And I'm just if you're plant-based, that's and the same with cars. People now, of course, we're looking at gas prices just going up crazily. And there are people who kind of have already dialed it down a little bit. And that's not to say how great we are. That's just to say this is a really resilient way to live. And, we're hearkening back to a quote, a more analog time. And in that, there's a lot of power. It's quiet power, and it's accessible. People can conceive of, whereas in the past, it was, oh, when will I ever make enough money so that I can buy that second SUV, right? It's now oh, you have fun, you drive less, you have joy, you get there faster, I guess I don't need, we're helping give permission for people to dial it back. And I think people didn't even know that was possible. And so once you start talking about people who are doing it, both in their personal life and kind of integrating that into, or having that drive their values and what they're doing professionally, it opens up some joy.
Well, it's an interesting angle. And I follow you on this one. Yet you mentioned the professional side also. And that's really something that I wanted to ask you about. Because I get it about the, quiet influence, as you mentioned, and the fact that, you have the choice, not always, but you have the choice not to buy an SUV. You don't necessarily have the choice not to drive. That's a different story. Going vegan, and once again, going vegan might be easier in some part of the US or some part of the world than others, just because in some area they don't have access to good enough fresh food, which is insane, but that's true in many poor places in city around the world. Focusing more on the core audience of this podcast, which is mostly workers in the tech sector or interacting with the tech sector, I would say. You mentioned a lot being seen leading. There's quiet daily change, or there's quiet habits that you pushing, but just by doing who you are and doing your stuff is the way you advocate for change. But many people in our audience are engineers, product managers, or sustainability leads, not C-level. And what does being seen leading look like when you're an individual contributor or mid-level manager in a tech company? Because you don't have the same leeway than, okay, I'm going to go vegan. You're not going to say, okay, we're going to stop using this tool, or we're going to stop dealing with this supplier because we don't align with their values. So in a more professional environment, and of course I'm focusing in the tech sector because this is what I'm talking mostly about, but I guess it's pretty true for many other sectors. Yeah. How do you see this lack of leeway, or maybe being a bit less free to make your own call?
I think the thing for me is that you still can influence the thinking of those people around you at that mid-level. So you can build a kind of more of a force of people who are quietly influencing, quietly advancing a couple, more innovations related to sustainability by the human beings on that team it's all about kind of building some momentum. And so all of these people are leaders. All of these people have influence on somebody, some group of people in their space. And that can become a collective of something that starts to move up the chain, to the leadership. Making it sound like it's some sort of thing where you've got a strategy and you have meetings about it and whatever, that's not it. It's about you as a person going, yeah, the work that I do in green tech is really important to me, and I see the way the world is going, and I still want to push through with this because these are my values. And so kind of doubling down on the realization that you do in your exchanges, meetings, Slack channel, conversations, have some ability to keep the mood up about these sustainability things, have the ability to have in casual conversations, let people know how much you love your e-bike. And again, that seems so minor, but it connects the dots to why you're committed to green tech. So I don't know if that's really answering your question, but it's these smaller things that add up and form more of kind of a basis that will ultimately either catch the attention of the CEO, or in the world that we live, maybe they won't, but it will in the meantime kind of collectively gather more people who sort of share those values. And maybe that's, you figure out a way to work more green or sustainability or climate action into the things you do, right? Or ultimately you go off and you do your own innovation. So that may not be exactly what you were looking for, but it's based on this sort of deep belief that your personal values can really impact kind of your professional space, and you can, much more than be impacting the people around you. And that collectively, that is worth doing. And because there will be a shift, you may not ever see it or be able to calculate it, which would drive a green engineer crazy, because there's no data to it. So in a way, it's a belief.
In tech or in any company, there are quite a lot of discrepancy or gap between personal convictions and corporate constraints. The PR guidelines, the regulated communications, or you've got a lot of, at the moment, AI all-in strategy. So AI right. Everywhere. And the examples that you provided, and I got it, it's more personal life being brought into the company as an example. And this quite influencing. Obviously, it works really well, and it's a way, I would say, to say I still stand my ground, and it's not because the wind has turned a bit that I'm not going to say quietly and casually that, I'm eating less red meat or less meat or whatever. However, my question is also more about changes within the professional environment. Like I'm a developer. I'm a software engineer or whatever. And I really see that if we start implementing this model of AI, the way we do it fast and quick and dirty, I would say, energy consumption is going up to the roof. Carbon emissions are going up to the roof. And yet no one is listening. What do you believe are the way to influence regarding this specific decision without getting fired? Because we don't want people to get fired or to be, cornerback, I would say.
The way that I've heard professionals talk about this in terms of sort of up the chain in leadership within a corporation, et cetera, is to more, of course, say we will be saving so much money if we, over the long run, right? So, right, talking about these very kind of physical specific things. But the other thing that I think is a possibility is just, and usually there's going to be one company that's doing something a little bit different that is finding success and or getting good PR. So if there's one company that has come out and said, we're going to do we're figuring AI out more sustainably, or we've figured out the data center situation or whatever, it can be done. It's being done. By the way, have you noticed that this company is getting good PR? So unfortunately, right, it is a PR thing. And so let's give an example. Previously in the US, it used to be cool, or you'd get really good PR if you were doing the diversity, equity, the DEI stuff, right? And now with this new administration or government, it's like, oh, shoot, you're not getting good PR for that. So you take it all back. What's happening now with energy is that government, the way it is now, is sort of fighting and saying, no, we're going to keep fossil fuels, we're going to keep coal, whatever. And all of the science is showing that renewable energy is just like a complete obvious, this is the way it's going, and it's saving, businesses money and blah, blah, blah. It's just like, if you can, and I think we're at this moment of transition where if you can kind of figure out ways not to get mad or sort of say, this is, I'm mad, become this big anti-everything person in your company, but just go, oh, here's a curious thing. I noticed that thus and so company is doing it this way. How interesting. They did a study that came out and showed, right? So you're doing it that way. Two things. One, you're just starting to open up the accessibility to the powers that be in the company to make decisions a little bit more along those lines. You're getting braver as somebody who can figure out how to pull that together. And it's something that I've talked about before, which is leadership isn't just, standing your ground at some meeting. It's also becoming the curator and the convener of like, hey, you're the one. You choose to be the one in your company watching and seeing that there's another company over in this other country or whatever, right, that's doing something differently. You become the kind of internal research agent going, no, this is possible. I just want to let you know, and then walking away. You become the curator and the convener of all, like if people are going, I guess we should start thinking about our energy use for AI more. That guy, or that person who works in this department seems to know a lot about that. Let's go ask them. So again, you're becoming this sort of visible lighthouse or guidance thing, not with no judgment, but with you decide to be the one keeping up on the green tech that's happening in your sector or the ways people are dealing with AI or whatever. And then you kind of just keep sharing that information. You then become known as the person to go to. That's leadership. You have a lot of climate influence. You're not sticking out a flag that means they're all going to come get you and fire you. But you're making these small little like, oh yeah, I'm the one who can show you that it's possible because I'm keeping up on all the companies that are already doing this and kind of the cool research that's coming out. You become the like magazine editor for your topic, for the sustainability in your topic, and everyone starts to look at you. You stick your nose out first and kind of love up and point out all the opportunities that corporation itself doesn't have time or doesn't make the budget or time to research really themselves. They're just going along as fast as they can. You become the internal kind of research and insight gatherer, and you just keep sharing it with no emotion, right?
And Andrea, just between you and I and a few thousand listeners, that's good for us because these curator, they will need, content provider like podcaster providing them these good stories, huh?
Well, yes.
No, but
yes.
hence your...
But also, they could become the internal podcaster, right? So it
Absolutely.
I do own that I want to be a person that's sort of, interviewing people that are doing interesting things more interestingly, right? And more values-based. And you are doing what you do. But also, I think we elevate podcasters or CEOs or whatever to this level. I think that anyone could become the once a month newsletter writer on this topic and create a thing. So it doesn't have to be anything as fancy as starting a podcast, but and I'm on Blue Sky, I'm on a social media platform, not because I love it, but because it's a way for me to go, see, it's happening. Here's an example. See, it's happening. Here's an example. I become the curator of, I have a couple of tags. I talk about joy as an act of resistance. I'm using the name and fame tag. I am known as a joyful voice who's sharing stories of really interesting things that are being done in city government or by a person inventing this or that make it more accessible to people, make people go, oh, wow, I didn't know that was possible. I want to do more research on that. So to your point, we all can decide to be that curator at some basic level and some channel that we're comfortable with. It could be a LinkedIn post,
Yeah. Well, fun fact, you and Ross, you convinced me, and right after our episode will be live, I will reactivate my Blue Sky account. I was like, I've got so much difficulties just to handle the LinkedIn one. But yeah, it seems to be where the fun people are. So yeah, I think I will join you on Blue Sky.
Good. Well, and I want to make a pause here for anybody who's listening, because you pick that person may really love Instagram at a personal level. If you're comfortable on that space, start using it for this, right? And I've backed off. LinkedIn has not been that fun or productive. I mean, people are still on there saying things, but I mainly do Blue Sky now. So to your point, find the one that you're more comfortable with, where you really see energy happening, where you're able to do this kind of fun curation and see in real time that people are like, thanks, I needed that research right now. How did you know? That doesn't happen on LinkedIn. So
no, that doesn't. I'm still comfortable on LinkedIn, but yeah. But you're right.
Yeah, but picking a social platform that you feel comfortable on, that you can just pick one and don't, you know what I mean? I'm with you. You got to reel it in.
But it's follow your pleasure, follow where you get happiness. I'd just like to rewind a bit, just to make sure I understand you well about your answer about the professional environment, because that's something that I've never really considered it that way, and I really want to make sure that I understood you well. What you're saying is basically most of the time when people, they want to be vocal about something mostly related to sustainability in our case, in their company, they picture themselves and they position themselves with some sort of an activist mindset, which is mostly going against. Watch out, we shouldn't do this, we shouldn't do that, blah, blah, blah. And that's where they expose themselves to the risk of getting fired or getting into trouble, I would say. Your position is, first of all, these people will have created legitimacy, I would say, by just acting normal on their personal life and just, as you mentioned, joining a meeting with a bike helmet and so on. So they will be, first layer is like building your own credibility, like, oh, he's someone or she's someone, paying attention to this, not being a hero. And then being a provider of alternatives without judging the decisions made in the company. I mean, obviously, if you're in a company which is all in sustainability and climate change, you can be much more vocal. But I imagine today a lot of tech workers are not in this position. So it's not like we shouldn't do AI because it costs too much energy, but it's really, I found this interesting tool. I found this interesting company who build good PR. I found a way to save a bit of money. And just, dropping the stuff and see what happens. If some momentum starts to get built, obviously jump on it. If not, you've done your stuff and you can become this sort of internal curator. Am I understanding you right here?
Yes, you are. The other thing that I will say is, and I don't know how everything's playing out because people are holding on to their jobs with dear life because everybody's losing jobs. But ultimately, as things go, there's no downside to developing that role of being a curator or convener. There's no downside to it because ultimately, let's say, and I know the company won't like it or whatever, but let's say your next job happens and you have already long since become someone who's known to know about this stuff. You could become a wonderful source for a story, a media story, right? So you're only enhancing your career by becoming this curator and figuring out how to share these bits non-judgmentally, non-emotionally, right? Just put them out there. You're only enhancing your career and starting to seed different interesting ways to think within your company. There's no downside. So you certainly, not going to spend your whole life on it. But if you're a person who's curious about this to begin with, you're already noticing the stuff that I'm saying you should notice. And then you can put it out. Just go, hey, did you guys notice this company's doing it this way? And drop it. There's no downside to it ultimately. And I think that it also aligns with your values in that you're starting to kind of seed. I think seeding is a good way to think about it. That you're starting to seed, it really aligns with your values. You're going to feel better about the fullness of what you're delivering to your profession. And you're not asking to be called out or fired in that role. But you may be building on something really incredible that could ultimately 5-10 years from now, really blossom.
If you're enjoying this episode, help us get more responsible technologists on board. Please rate the podcast 5 stars on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Deezer, and drop us a comment on YouTube. And now, back to our episode. So you've been around for more than 30 years in the marketing and communication field. We've discussed about building new skills. You've discussed about picking the right platforms, which is actually the one that you enjoy the most. So there is some sort of an elephant in the room when we are trying to tool up other responsible technologists in this podcast and make them better voices, better influencers, which is how do we deal now with the rise of artificial intelligence? And let's be very concrete here. I'm really talking about the sub part, which is generative AI, and the fact that so much content is generated so fast, so cheaply, with a very widespread, I would say, a scope of quality. What is your take on it, and how responsible technologists or every sustainability advocates actually should play the new rules of the game? Should we go all against Gen AI, embrace it? What are the pitfalls?
It's a big question, and maybe my answer won't be, it won't fit the podcast or whatever, but with the episode, but I hear you. And I was at kind of a happy hour with some environmental journalists the other day here in Seattle, and the conversation came up because several of them are podcast people. They, content is the thing. There are so many reasons to be very resistant to it. I think that we don't know, and I think that it feels to me like we each individually can decide. And the other thing that I kind of know in my knowing and in my heart is that figuring out how you're going to use it or not use it, your person and your style and your mark are still coming out. So if you're not overly worried on competition and how all these other, content that's generated by AI coming out of every other place is going to overtake and your podcast will never be big or your, whatever. I am of the mind that there are very specific people that I'm going to reach with my stuff. And to whatever degree I use AI or not, me is going to come through it. And the same with you. So if you're not just concerned with, well, everybody says best practices for a podcast or a post or whatever is this number. I trust, because I feel like in a way, we're really just going through something massive here. It isn't just the US. There's some major change. And how we come out of this, you can resist AI and you can fight it and be an activist about it and kind of just, I think it's going to be more subtle and more individual, and that those who are making content or who are out here trying to reach people with their messages, it will work because it's going to come from your heart, and you will reach the 20 people you need to reach or whatever it is, right? Who then can take what they hear from you and go on. So in a way, it's kind of a more spiritual, or, I just have faith and knowing that responsible people who are really aware of their AI use will figure out how to use it. And it's not going to be that we're competing with all this AI. The right people will eventually find what we're saying, and it will work out. So again, I'm kind of Pollyanna. You could call me that. I'm very positive. I'm very interested in human scale, kind of connecting. AI is getting in there. But I do not believe that people that are trying to handle AI well and have something to say and have their own kind of personal take on stuff, we will still be able to do work that reaches the right people. and everyone's going to use it differently. I would say that if people just completely sell out to AI, it will be so obvious and they will not reach the people that they need to reach. But if you figure out how to use it, I don't think resisting it whole heart is going to work.
There are two things in what you say that struck me. So I'm going to translate for hardcore techies. Basically, what she's just said is upload your heart to the RAG. Sorry.
Oh, upload your what? Upload my heart.
It's when you train, not when you train, but when you want to use an AI on a very specific subset of data, you do it in a RAG, which is a vectorial database, and it's basically where you put like the rules of how the AI should behave, or sources that you want first and foremost that the AI will use. And when I was listening to you, I was like, okay, so basically find a way to, dematerialize your heart or your mind or your spirit or whatever, upload it in the RAG, and it will help you being yourself. But that was illustrating well what you were saying, which is use AI with the way you are. So that's sort of the first message that I got. The second one is maybe a bit more depressing, or maybe I got it wrong, because you sort of envision the fact that our reach will be reduced because there is so much content that will happen that we should feel comfortable now not to chase for the viral post, the holy grail of influencer, but more like, hey, I'm fine, I'm doing my stuff, I've got a few hundred listeners or a few thousand readers or whatever. And if it's good enough, I should stick to this rather than hoping that I will convince the entire world, because the entire world is now so hard to reach out because of all these AI-generated floppy contents that's fine. And maybe recalibrating what influence means and forgetting about, big 10 million followers influencer, and rather sort of what you've said in the beginning, which is, hey, ground it, like be where you are, be an actor of change in the neighborhood rather than, trying to change the entire world. But
yes.
Maybe I'm...
No, you're getting it right, and it isn't depressing because going at that level. So I'll give you one of the examples that was sort of an eye roll for me, like, oh, this is ridiculous, is when all the like celebrity podcasts then were like, Netflix just sucked them in and now they're video. Basically, that's a TV show, right? So how do we independent podcasters compete? Well, back up. Again, it's me saying back up. If you back off of the gas-powered car, you start riding a bike. Go analog. In a way, get back off your dreams of grandeur, right? Like having a bazillion followers or competing with whatever, and just reel it in and go, wait a second. What this thing that I deliver isn't for everybody, and people can't understand it, but the right people that hear this message that I have, they take something with it, and it does change the world. I'm convinced of that, and I'm convinced of that for you and for anybody who kind of owns like, oh, this is my slot, this is my thing that I can really do. And I have never been super worried about my stats or my virality on things or my likes or whatever. I'm just sort of, it's all out of proportion because of what AI and content is doing now. There's no way we can compete. So why not back up and really get to the heart of our thing and our values and our mission and kind of what we want to do, and believe and trust in that. And you talked about recalibrating influence, or I think you used the word recalibrating, and I've talked about redefining it a lot, right? So people say, I've been saying that I'm a climate influencer, and people are like, oh, like that. And then they immediately are like, so you must have millions of followers on Instagram. I'm like, well, no, like I'm hardly on Instagram because I don't get how that influences anybody, right? And then the other thing is that I've heard that people will pay an influencer to like say, use this shampoo, and or one time you might have a celebrity who at the time is plant-based, kind of say something about a vegan product or whatever. You pay that person $1 million to do that one time. There's no credibility. There's no legitimacy. You pay that person for one shot on their Instagram. Who cares? That's not anything, right? So if you can understand your influence versus what culture calls influence, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about your influence and with your tighter circles matters so much more. And it's that whole, way back in the day, there used to be a shampoo commercial. It was for a shampoo called Fabergé. And it was like, if you tell two people, they'll tell two people, they'll tell two, and there's a map of faces. And I think that's what we all have to get to. Like, if 5 people get something out of this podcast episode and they tell a couple more people, that's what matters. And that's how this is going to work. Now, I am not here to define how you're going to monetize this, right? I'm just saying that from this climate and sustainability perspective of reaching people and making change, this is the approach I'm taking. And I think this is the approach that will see us all through whatever this transition is, because it can be so depressing. So rather than chase all of this, dial it back, get really true to yourself, because you will reach the right people that you need to reach at that time, who will then proceed to reach the right people moving forward.
Redefining our ambition, that's a very good one. And I didn't at all intend to position the podcast that way, at least this episode. But when you were talking about it, I had this little word like mental health in my head popping up all the time, because there is so much climate anxiety and so much depression going on with climate activists or just people genuinely caring about it. Then listening to you was like, I don't want to be rude, so I'm not going to use any gross word, but I was like, oh, damn, maybe we should stop trying to overachieve or overreaching out and being a good enough influencer with whatever people I can reach. And some Brazilian guy and some Chinese guy, he or she will do the same in their own country or whatever, but like lowering a bit the bar.
Yeah, well, because it's better it is, and you're saying mental health it's mental health, because you cannot chase that. You can't, no one can chase that. And so it's like, and I've said, there was somebody put a message on Blue Sky the other day, and then I kind of riffed off of it. And the message was something like, the Strait of Hormuz is closed. You don't go, oh my gosh. He put in the thing, no problem, renewable, right? So instead of seeing stuff and going, and so that's the same thing I was saying. I said same thing with dairy and meat prices. You can say, oh my gosh, or you can say, no problem, I'm veering plant-based, right? And you can say gas prices are going up because of this or whatever. And then you can say, no problem, I've already, gotten rid of one of my SUVs and I'm now riding an e-bike for partial, like, look at the ways that you can look at the stuff that's happening that we have no control over and go, I see that, I'm facing that. And I've, recalibrated my life a little bit so that I can get through it. It's resilience. And here's the other thing is, right now, bazillions of followers and virality, that's all in fact falling apart as it is. When we get through this, people are going to be like, what did that do for you, buddy? What did having a bazillion people listen to your ridiculous comedy podcast do for the world? Nothing. They're not going to come out of this very resilient. We're doing our part. We're impacting one guy in China and one guy, as you said, and that's where it's, and that's going to change the world. Each of us doing that in our own way. So it is mental health. It's backing up. The best way to stick it to the man, which they used to talk about in terms of smoking, sticking it to the U.S. tobacco companies, was the younger people in that era. I don't know if it was the 70s. There was some campaign where they were just like, the best way to stick it to the man, who is big tobacco companies, is to stop smoking. And everyone's like, oh. And so the best way to stick it to this horrible world that's spiraling out of control is to step back and go, okay, I don't participate in that. I'm kind of veering a life in this direction. You can't get my joy. I think that it is
my joy.
You can't get my joy. You can't get it. And that's why I talk about my tattoo a lot. It's off of an album by a band called Idols, IDLES, out of the UK. And the album was called Joy as an Act of Resistance. And so that's the first tattoo I ever got. So joy as an act of resistance. So that's another thing. All of this fast paced, you must have this many followers, you must have this many likes. That is that is like the opposite of your joy. Your joy is if one particular person responds to some post and goes, that changed my life. And I was immediately able to do XYZ with it or pass it along to my boss who it helped them make a decision. That's all you need.
I mean, I get stuck in this chasing of audience and so on because that's the way I measure influence or just how good or how useful I am. But the truth is that what really makes my day is when I receive an email or a LinkedIn message from someone that I've never heard of. I don't know the person. And 2 weeks ago, she told me, Gaël, is there an issue with the podcast because the transcript is not available? And I was like, first of all, I'm very pleased that the transcript is read by people because that's an accessibility action for us, but it takes a bit of time. So that's also an investment. And it was like, okay, so I'm sorry, actually, no, because we're migrating the website and we've got a bit of an issue with this transcript, but it will be soon. And I was like, oh God, I'm so happy because it means that it has a very true and positive influence on someone that I've never heard of. And by the way, I apologize. The new website should be live next week, or actually it should be already live when this episode goes live. So you can access the transcript again. But that's the sort of little interactions are 10 times more beneficial, I would say, for
rewarding
than, oh my God, yeah, rewarding. That's the word I was looking for.
There's a point I wanted to make, and that is the way that person reached out to you is also something you can do. So the little things that we take in, and something that I've also, when I'm advising, I have one-on-ones with clients, the idea is to reach out first and say, I love your show. This is why it helped me with this, whatever. Be the one to reach out and say that because you know how valuable that is to you. That keeps that person going too. So we have influence and we have power in both directions, And so the more that we also comment or say nice things to people who are producing content that we love, the better.
Usually my closing question is, can you bring one positive news about sustainability or IT sustainability? Good thing with you is like the entire episode is about good things. I think your closing words could be, you can get my joy. I really love this one.
Oh, yes. Make it the title.
But if you want to add another one...
No, I
Let's do that. Let's do that. You can get my joy.
You can't get it. And joy as an act of resistance is that phrase just sticks with me. I think you can't get my joy. One of the things is that in all this conversation and anything where I'm talking with somebody, it's like, remember that you have joy. Go back and find it, right? Because we live in a world where you could, and then when you realize, oh yeah, I have joy in this, and then that is the thing that fuels, that is the thing that drives your work and everything else you do moving forward. So we think, and especially in America, that joy is some sort of kid thing, right? It's for children. And we give it up at like 10, and then we never admit that we want or have joy. What I've realized is that has fueled me my whole life. And when I've been trying to be professional, right, or it's like completely screwed me over. And now I'm like back at it, and I'm just looking for joy. I'm going to elevate joy, and it has a lot to do with climate influence.
Excellent. So let's try this title. And let's chase joy. Let's chase joy. Okay, Andrea, wow, that was a big ride. First of all, I'm very happy, and I want to thank you again for joining a podcast which is sort of a niche podcast and not necessarily the overall sustainability podcast as you do. But I think it will be super valuable to have this sort of external perspective on how to do activism, leading by example, but being a quiet leader. I think a lot of tech workers could find comfort in what you said. So thanks again for joining and for sharing your insights. I really enjoy our exchange.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear it. I was honored to hear that you wanted to interview me, and I did realize that it could be a stretch for your listeners. It could be that, and so I was really just coming into this wanting to like make sure that I made this idea and this thing that I forward really kind of at least interesting in some way to your listeners. And if this conversation gets two people more interested in joy and kind of their values in this way, I feel great. So thank you so much for your interest in my work.
Job done. Thank you, Andrea. And let's talk soon. Thanks again for joining. Thank you for listening to this Green.io episode. Because accessible and transparent information is in the DNA of Green.io, all the references mentioned in this episode are in the show notes. More information and the full transcript can also be found on our website, greenio.tech. Huge thanks to everyone who made this episode possible, starting with our partner, Good Gosh Media, and our executive producer, Russell Becker, and of course, you, my dear responsible technologists. Let's keep on building together a greener digital world.
One bite at a time.